Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're going to look at how a morbid, 60-year-old mystery deep in the Ural Mountains perfectly illustrates something really fascinating about human psychology. Mostly, why our brains so often reject clear scientific truth in favor of dark, sprawling conspiracies. We're talking, of course, about the infamous Dyatlov Pass Incident. Now, you might think you know this story. 9 hikers perish under completely bizarre circumstances. But we aren't just here to recount a tragedy today. We're going to use the facts, the evidence, and some mind-blowing recent scientific breakthroughs to map out the exact architecture of a conspiracy theory. Picture this. It's late February 1959. Searcher Mikkel Shervevin and his rescue team have just arrived at Dead Mountain. They find the hikers' abandoned tent, and inside, a flask of vodka. As they're sitting there in freezing -30°C temperatures, they get ready to toast to the hikers being found alive. But another searcher stops him, uttering these haunting words. It instantly sets the stage for a totally unprecedented and deeply disturbing tragedy. They knew right then and there that they were no longer on a rescue mission. To truly understand why the conspiracies around this event grew to be so wild, we first have to walk through the bizarre reality of what those searchers actually found. We need to look at the raw data that completely baffled the world.
So here's how it started. In early February of 1959, a group of 10 highly skilled cross-country skiers, mostly university students in their 20s, set out on a harsh winter trek. Just 5 days into the expedition, a hiker named Yuri Yudin turns back because of chronic joint pain. Think about that incredibly mundane detail, just a random flare-up of joint pain, inadvertently made him the absolute sole survivor of the expedition. By February 26th, rescuers find the abandoned tent on the slopes of a mountain whose name translates ominously from the local Mansi language to Dead Mountain, and it would actually take months for the melting snow to finally reveal the last 4 bodies. And here is where things get truly wild. These incredibly gruesome, perplexing facts basically became the jet fuel for decades of intense public speculation. The tent wasn't torn by the wind, you guys. It was literally slashed open from the inside, meaning they were desperate to get out. Footprints showed them fleeing in just socks, or even bare feet, out into the black, icy night. 2 victims were found under a tree, dressed only in their underwear, with nearby branches broken 5 meters up the trunk. Like, did they climb up to look for something or to escape something? Add to that, victims were missing eyes, one was missing a tongue, they had twisted necks, and their clothing actually tested positive for radiation.
And this quote right here brilliantly illustrates the crux of the whole mystery. When those final bodies were found in a ravine, the coroner discovered devastating internal injuries. We're talking shattered ribs and severe chest trauma. But there was absolutely zero external trauma to match it. How on earth do you get hit with the force of a car crash on a remote snowy mountainside without leaving a single trace of what hit you? The coroner even explicitly noted that no human being possessed the strength to inflict that kind of damage.
Okay, so you basically have a locked room mystery right on the side of a frozen mountain. But things were about to get a whole lot murkier thanks to the geopolitical climate at the time and the actions of the state. Because after months of investigation, the Soviet government just abruptly shuts the case down. They label it top secret, which, they did with almost all domestic matters in Soviet-era Russia, and they offer this incredibly vague, almost poetic explanation, an insurmountable force of nature. When you have a slashed tent, missing eyes, and radioactive clothing, and the government just shrugs and locks away the files, they inadvertently create a massive, gaping information vacuum. And human beings absolutely abhor an information vacuum. Without a clear narrative, amateur sleuths, journalists, and the public rushed in to fill the void. You get theories spanning from the somewhat plausible, to the highly improbable, to the outright absurd. You have Russian investigative journalists theorizing that local hunters attacked them while high on psychedelic mushrooms. You've got people seriously suggesting a botched alien abduction or a mythical Yeti attack. And then, sitting right there in the middle, you have the military theories, which during the intense Cold War paranoia of 1959 felt incredibly real to people.
The military test theory definitely gained the most traction because it neatly tied up all those weird loose ends the original investigation just ignored. And surprisingly, it was championed by the sole survivor himself, Yuri Yudin, right up until he died in 2013. He insisted his friends fell victim to a weapons test. Parachute mines explode in the air and are actually known to cause the exact kind of devastating internal blunt force injuries the hikers suffered. A radiological weapon test would perfectly explain the radiation on their clothing and the burns on their hands. It made terrifying logical sense.
But let's fast forward all the way to 2019. The The USSR is long gone, the old documents are finally unsealed, and two Swiss scientists, a snow expert named Johann Gaume and a geotechnical engineering professor named Alexander Puzrin, step in. They finally have the raw data and the modern technology to test the most mundane yet heavily criticized theory of all, an avalanche.
To grasp how they solve this, we have to understand something called a delayed slab avalanche. This concept is vital because opponents of the avalanche theory always threw out two arguments. The slope on Dead Mountain was way too gentle, and the timing made no sense. Like, why would an avalanche happen hours after they went to sleep? Well, a delayed slab avalanche works a bit differently. It requires a very specific set of circumstances to detach a block of snow long after the initial disruption happens. And the way they built this into a scientific breakthrough is just brilliant. First, the researchers mapped it and proved the slope was actually 30 degrees, which is just steep enough for an avalanche. Second, they factored in human action. The hikers had dug into the snow to protect their tent from the wind, unwittingly destabilizing that underlying layer. But here is the absolute genius part. To calculate exactly how fast and hard the snow would hit, they utilized the exact same computer animation code used in the 2013 Disney movie Frozen. They literally borrowed Hollywood tech, designed to make cartoon snow look realistic, to accurately simulate how a dense block of ice would behave on that specific Siberian terrain. The results of that simulation were undeniable. It showed that hours after they fell asleep, a cohesive snow slab 5 meters wide hurtled down the mountain and slammed directly into their tent, and it hit them with the blunt force of a four-wheel drive vehicle. This simulation perfectly accounted for the shattered ribs, the cracked skulls, all of that bizarre car crash trauma the coroner reported. It completely eliminates the need for a parachute mine or some crazy gravity fluctuation or an alien attack to explain those physical injuries. So suddenly, all the eerie supernatural elements of this crime scene are totally demystified. It turns from a sci-fi thriller into a desperate, tragic fight for survival. The slab hits, the crushed tent becomes a trap. Panicking and injured, they slash their way out and flee toward the tree line, without even pausing to grab coats or boots. In the pitch black, terrible visibility causes them to separate. Some try to build a fire to survive, which explains the burns and the broken branches up in the tree, but hypothermia takes them. The rest fall into the ravine. And those missing tongues, eyes, and eyebrows? Simply the tragic result of a stream washing over them and scavenging creatures finding them over the weeks before the rescue party arrived. Even the radiation is easily explained by thorium inside the camping gas lanterns they were using.
So it's a neat, peer-reviewed conclusion. The math works out, the physics are sound. You would think this high-tech scientific resolution would finally, once and for all, close the book on the Dyatlov Pass. But that is exactly what did not happen.
Despite the computer models working flawlessly, both amateur sleuths and heavily credentialed experts actively pushed back against the Swiss findings. The conspiracy theories didn't evaporate at all. In a lot of circles, they actually just dug in deeper. So why?
Because while the scientific simulation perfectly explains the behavior of the snow, it really struggles to explain the deeply illogical behavior of the human beings involved. Like geohazards expert Jim McWane points out here, experienced winter hikers know that leaving a shelter naked is instant death. A computer can simulate ice velocity all day long, but can it simulate the mind of a terrified 23-year-old? McWane argues that only an active, pursuing threat, like someone physically tracking them, could ever compel that level of panicked, suicidal exposure.
And this right here perfectly illustrates the gap where conspiracies thrive. You've got mathematical plausibility on one side and behavioral logic on the other. Yes, the 30-degree slope avalanche is physically, mathematically possible, but fleeing without boots, abandoning basic survival protocols, and wandering blindly into a freezing forest completely defies the way experts believe trained survivalists act. When hard, objective science fails to perfectly align with subjective human behavioral logic, doubt creeps back in. And as we know, doubt is literally all a conspiracy theory needs to survive.
So what is the architecture of a lasting conspiracy? Well, the Dyatlov Pass lays out the blueprint perfectly. First, you need foundational distrust. That was birthed right away by a Soviet state classifying the deaths as top secret. Second, you have the messy, chaotic unpredictability of human panic, which never really fits into our neat scientific models. But the third point is by far the most important, our own psychology. It is deeply, profoundly unsettling for us to accept that 9 young, incredibly fit, expertly trained friends can just be wiped out by a completely random, senseless shift in the snow.
Ultimately, we crave meaning when tragedy strikes. A secret military weapon or a mythical monster provides us with a villain. It gives the horror some kind of purpose. An avalanche? That's just terrible random luck. I want to leave you with this question to consider the next time a neat, scientifically backed explanation is totally rejected by the public in favor of a sprawling conspiracy. When the brutal forces of reality are just too terrifying or random to accept, will we always reach for a grander, darker narrative? Think about that, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.